Good afternoon, and welcome to D&I One-on-One, a monthly webinar series where we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, and belongingness. Today's conversation is all about ADHD through the lens of lived experience because myself and my guest have it. So we'll talk about how it impacts us at work. What are some strategies you can use to minimize the impact of the challenges you find, the symptoms you find challenging, and also ramp up your ADHD superpowers. My name is Jina Etienne. I am the creator and host of this series. I'm a certified diversity executive, and my work is centered on something I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. I develop trainings and workshops as well as facilitate conversations and programs focused on helping participants connect self-awareness and mindfulness to their daily actions and words. And the goal is to foster a greater awareness so that collectively we can share and create our intention of having an inclusive workplace where people feel safe connecting and sharing, engaging, where we are intentionally inclusive, the outcome of which is belonging. Joining me today is Ipalla Cooke. Ipalla is Director of Diversity Analytics at Penn State Health. You notice I said analytics, which means she runs numbers all day, every day. So she's not an accountant, but we'll let her into the club. As an HR professional, she is committed to creating environments that allow everyone to reach their full potential. She's been working to support inclusive cultures long before it became D&I, as we call it today. Her experience includes roles with an increasing responsibility in a number of different industries at Chevron, Honeywell Aerospace, and the Hershey Company. And fun fact, speaking of Hershey, she had a cameo in a Hershey commercial that starred her son. The commercial ran on the Jumbotron in Times Square. And she's not sure if it's still running, but there's a picture from that ad on a door at Chocolate World. Now, Ipalla, remind me, who's the character that your son is playing in this ad?
So we affectionately refer to him as Mr. Reese Big Cup because the picture is of him showing or holding a large or gigantic Reese cup. And the campaign is Fill Your Cup.
So he's not a Reese's cup. He's holding one. Got it.
He's holding one. Yes.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Glad to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about ADHD at work. Ipalla and I, as I mentioned, both have ADHD. And we have a lot in common, as we've discovered. We met at a D&I conference and we did we should meet later and after this connect. And so we did. We had Zoom coffee, as I like to call it. And in that conversation, somewhere along the conversation, Ipalla said, squirrel moment. I laughed and said, I call it a shiny thing. And we knew instantly that we shared sort of this connection around ADHD. That comment really resonated. And then we jumped into a conversation about, how it shows up for us. So why don't we just jump in there, Ipalla? Can you talk about how ADHD shows up for you?
Sure. It's something that I became aware of and had a formal diagnosis later in life. And what I recognize is that I have the ability to have great focus, almost an intense focus on things that I'm really interested in. And to help with that and keep me moving forward, I keep rolling prioritized lists as I work, both at work, in the office, and at home. I also utilize my Fitbit to keep me moving, so to kind of break the cycle. Those are two things that just pop top of mind that I'm aware of on a daily basis. And there's a slide, I believe, Jina, in our deck that tells symptoms. And I think that would be a great place to jump next.
I think it's interesting because, let me look at it here, easily distracted. And you talked about focus. And I didn't put on here, I put here to name a few because Lord knows the list actually goes on and on and on. But you know what? Wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're going to start giving away the answers. Let's go, Autumn, if we can, to that very first poll question. Let's see how familiar our attendees are with ADHD.
Sure. As she mentioned, that first poll is up and running. As a reminder, we'll have 4 during the presentation, and you need to answer at least 3 to earn credit. However, I do suggest answering all 4, and we'll leave them open for about a minute to make sure everyone has an opportunity to vote.
While it's open, I'm going to encourage everyone to drop your question in. As we go along, we're going to want to take questions. Speaking of ADHD and distraction, we might not always remember to save time at the end for Q&A, so we want to take them as we go. We would love this to be a conversation. So I am watching the answers come in.
Oh, great. Can you see them, or do you need me to read them?
I can see them coming in, but Lord knows, everyone, please extend some grace. Still trying to figure out this platform. But it's kind of evenly split. Ipalla, I don't know if you can see these results, but so far it's almost like it's 21, 34, 30 like percentages. So we have a wide range.
Yes, and so 34% led with somewhat familiar, 29% a little familiar, 21% very, 13% unfamiliar, 3% prefer not to answer. Back to y'all.
Thank you. By the way, somebody in the Q&A said that their daughter, they chase squirrels too.
Yes.
I thought that was funny. So 13% said they're unfamiliar. So we're going to just want to keep that in mind as we talk. So let me go back to the wide-ranging symptoms. You talked about focus, and yet we hear distractibility is a very common way that people think of ADHD. So do you experience distraction, or do you never experience distraction?
Oh, no, I definitely get distracted. That's how we had our squirrel moment. If I'm working on something, I can become intensely focused. Flip side is if we're in an open forum, as we've met and talked, and there is a lot of stimuli going on, then those are when my squirrel moments happen. And I have to be very intentional to stay on point or topic. But it's something that I've learned to deal with and have developed, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, different strategies to get what I need to get done.
I want to back up a little bit and let's talk about definitions. So for those who said they aren't as familiar with ADHD, I just wanted to drop this up here. There are some resources, so please download the handout. At the very end of the slide handout, there are resources in the form of books and articles that can help you to learn a little bit more. But ADHD, it is part of the family of ways that our brains work differently that we call neurodiversity. And it's around these, as you can see, executive functioning skills. So attention, organization, emotional regulation, self-monitoring, self-control. And it can be mild where people have it, but it's not having severe impacts day to day. And then it can be severe, almost to the point of creating challenges navigating the world day to day.
Exactly.
There are 3 types, well, 2 types, and then a combination. So one is distraction, if you will, predominantly inattentive. One is hyperactive and impulsivity, which is really a lack of control, if you will. And then combined is a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. All right. So now I want to go back to that symptoms list if we can, because you talked about distraction. I see here impulsivity, abrupt impulsivity, hard staying focused in a conversation. You shared something with me interesting. Maybe you can share that story. When we met and we were at a networking event and you observed something about looking around. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes. When I'm in an open forum, and I noticed it with you as well, you will see that my eyes dart. I am forever looking around, trying to take in as much as I can. And it's not necessarily conscious. It's just how I'm wired. And as we talked, and maybe that's why we clicked, I noticed that you do the same.
So what's important here then, first tip in terms of strategies, or let me say, supporting colleagues at work, people won't necessarily tell you they have ADHD. And just because somebody is fidgeting or looking around doesn't mean they have it. But here's a cue or a clue that if somebody's looking around, it doesn't mean they're not listening.
That is absolutely correct. Because while my brain is wired to take in the various stimuli, there's a section of my brain that is taking in and listening to you intensely.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I find for me, sometimes doing something like looking away, I tend to look in that corner I've noticed in my office. So up and to the right, uh, that actually helps me listen better.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found that looking at, like even now when we're on this webcast and I'm looking at you,
Mm-hmm.
I feel sometimes a pressure to keep my eye contact on you. And I'm actually putting in effort to keep the focus. And as a result, I'm not listening as well. Do you experience that?
Yes, because you're, especially when you're in a conversation, I've found you're trying to take in the biofeedback and the cues based upon the facial
Mhm.
expressions, and that sends you off on a tangent. Whereas if you simply look at something that's, the corner of the room or what have you, you shut down that wondering section, as I call it, and
Mhm.
you can really be present and hear, which
It's
is
true.
it's counter to everything we're told about making eye contact, but it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this gets to everything we're told about, one of the things in the world, the work in this space of diversity, inclusion, culture, etc., is really disrupting the norms in the workplace. That in the past you had to dress a certain way, talk a certain way,
Mhm.
behave a certain way. And what the challenge for then those of us who are different in any category of different, there was this intense pressure to cover up or hide some of those things.
Mhm.
So people with ADHD might resist the urge to fidget or spend extra effort appearing to be focused, appearing to be listening. And I say appearing because it doesn't necessarily mean we're listening, but we look like we are.
Exactly. And you're tired at the end of the day
Yeah.
because so much energy is expelled in trying to acclimate and appear the way you're quote unquote supposed to.
Now, a little bit later, we're going to walk through the slides that we've created. We've put together a lot of lists in terms of supporting
Mhm.
different challenges that we might have with ADHD. But in full disclosure, by the way, one of the slides at the end was a bit of a shameless plug. Ipalla and I started a podcast last year called The Distracted Elephant.
Yeah.
And we named it that because we know elephants can sometimes, they're very intelligent, but they can also appear to be not paying attention because they can use nonlinear paths to navigate the world. So that's how we came up with it. And one of the lines you share in that is about albatross and superpower. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about, we'll share the line and then talk a little bit about what that means?
Sure. I am a firm believer that ADHD is not an albatross around our neck. It is a superpower. It is what makes us unique and allows us to show up authentically. It's that simple for me. And
Yeah.
I think adopting that thought process, that philosophy in my core has allowed me to move forward and get past feelings of being quote unquote different and not being like everyone else. And it's taken some of the pressure off, honestly, to not, what is it, fidget or, which
Not
is not
hide.
so, yeah, right, not hide it. And I saw one of the questions asked, do you need to disclose? And that's a really personal decision.
Yeah. Yeah. The challenge with any type of disclosure in the workplace is you are outing yourself, if you will. And for some people, it makes no difference. But for
Right.
other people, they might start treating you different because there's a lot of stigma around ADHD. There's some dismissiveness around ADHD.
Mhm.
Okay, I have a question. So here, I'm not giving away the answer. Hold on, let me find the question. All right, let's go ahead and do a second polling question. Why not? We're going to do them out of order. Autumn, let's go to this one. True or false? 78% of adults with ADHD were diagnosed in childhood.
All right, that poll number 2 is live on your screen. Go ahead and cast your vote.
And so, Paula, you've noticed some of the comments that have come in while this question is open. Do you have to disclose? I think you talked about that. There's some risk of disclosure and there's some stigma because some people, the idea that you can be an adult with ADHD in and of itself is like, yeah, you grow out of it. That's a myth. Somebody said, should DEI be called something different for it to be more receptive? I actually think that's the case. And Dwayne, I would invite you on June 11th. I'm doing a webinar specifically on can we call DEI something else? So I won't give it away. Someone asked, why do we call it a disorder? The DSM is a big manual that talks about, I should have written down the acronym for it. Do you remember what that stands for?
Diagnostic symptom something or another.
Manual. It outlines a lot of disorders and how they show up for us, mental, neurological disorders. So that's why it's called a disorder.
Right. But again, it need not be approached with that mindset. And that question on should you or do you have to disclose is really resonating with me because it is a personal choice. You have to know your audience and really think about whether or not that's the right choice for you. And if it is, and you're comfortable, then go forth. If it isn't, that's okay too, because it is very personal. And what you don't want is to have negative feedback that results in you changing who you are to fit in.
Yeah. Well, so the poll is closed and I see the response. True or false? 78% said it's false. But the answer is it's true. So 78, it's just a coincidence, by the way, that 78% is on the screen and 78% is the response. I say that so people don't get confused. The truth is that it is estimated that anywhere from 35 to 78% of children that are diagnosed maintain those symptoms into adulthood. So the idea that ADHD is something you can't get diagnosed for as an adult or you grow out of as a child is a myth. You and I both were diagnosed in our 40s.
Correct.
But now I'm like, how much is TMI? But your diagnosis also runs in the family. I know my sons were diagnosed with ADHD.
Same. That's how it up on my radar screen. Is that, once school started, others were noticing behaviors and the recommendation was to have him assessed. And as part of that, our pediatrician, which was, you can choose a pediatrician or a psychologist, and our pediatrician said, and you may want to be assessed as well because it runs in the family. And for me personally, so many light bulbs went off, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually want to go back to the slide that I had up here, the iceberg, if you will, because of some of those myths. We have above the waterline the things that people see or perceive to be around ADHD, that we're disorganized, that we can be disruptive. I know I have a tendency to interrupt. That tendency is directly tied to my ADHD. Physical restlessness, hyperactivity in kids might appear to be restlessness as adults. Multitasking, I tend to believe it's a bit of a myth, but I know that people with ADHD actually tend to bounce back and forth between tasks. But look below the waterline, creativity. I actually just posted on LinkedIn, there was a Scientific American article that was talking about why people with ADHD are more creative, higher degrees of intuition, or they're more intuitive. There are positives and some challenges associated with ADHD, but it's a wide range and it shows up differently for all of us.
Everyone. Exactly. And I think you should really, if you are an individual with ADHD or you believe you have it, take time to stop and think about how it shows up for you and assess, even if it's just a blank sheet of paper and pros and cons based upon your experience, and lean into your pros, because the creativity is real for me.
So,
You know, intuitiveness, again, is one that I just feel things and they usually are spot on. So again, it's not an albatross.
yeah, it's not an albatross. Let's go to this question. There are a couple questions in here about being diagnosed and what's the process, and I do want to make sure we answer those. But is it a myth that more and more people are being diagnosed? We're talking about it more. We're hearing about it more. Neurodiversity, I see it everywhere.
Well, we are talking about it more because it's a little less stigmatized. People are much more open. I think COVID really highlighted for individuals the fact that you were on a regular one day and then it all went poof the next day. A lot of the stimuli that kept you moving forward, that was familiar, went away. And so people became more aware. What also happened is that the DSM was being updated. So as part of that work, there was a lot more research and they had to incorporate it. So again, a lot of discussion in various formats occurred, and it became, highlighted, and folks started discussing it on a wider scale.
What I find really interesting about the changes to the DSM, some of the changes around ADHD really had to do with what is the science behind the diagnosis, what are the different types of symptoms, how does ADHD appear with other forms of neurodiversity. For example, someone with ADHD has a higher likelihood of having another form of neurodiversity. So autism spectrum disorder, dyslexia, some other form of different way of brain processing. It's fascinating, which is why I opened up some notes, because I want to address the question. Where's the question? What is the process for being diagnosed later in life? Regardless of when in life you get diagnosed, the process is the same. Right. So usually the diagnosis can be done by either, so I apologize, I'm reading my notes, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and a neurologist. Those are generally the people who do those diagnoses, but my recommendation is to go first see your primary care physician. You want to rule out that it's not something else. For example, bipolar disorder, which is a completely different class of neurodiversity. Autism spectrum disorder, low blood sugar. So there are different things that can create symptoms that mimic ADHD.
Exactly.
So you want to start there. And then there is, let me go back to that slide. This wide-ranging symptoms list, there is more than this. And so when you're diagnosed, it isn't that all of us sometimes have trouble following through. All of us sometimes might not be paying attention to instructions or feel restless. But the reason that you get a diagnosis is because there is a constant or chronic presentation of more than a certain number. I think it's 6 or in one category and so forth in another that tells you that you have ADHD. So there's a lot more to the diagnosis.
Right. There's a lot more to the diagnosis. It's not a one and done. And what I found is as you go through the assessment, you can really think back and understand that, yeah, some of these things fall into this list and there are others that are not here. And also because it can be a hereditary trait in the family, if you find that you're seeing it in your children or in other relatives, ask the question.
Mm-hmm. There's a question in here that says many job applications have a place to disclose that you have a disability with a general definition that includes things like ADD, depression, etc. So is it possible to declare the presence of a disability without disclosing what the disability is? So there's a general question there, but then there's also, how does this tie to ADHD?
So in my work, I always encourage individuals, because I'm a data person in the diversity space, if you're comfortable to disclose that you are an individual with a disability. There's no requirement that you say exactly what that disability is. And the government has provided a form which has a list of things that is by no means complete. So there's no reason you have to disclose what your disability is. It's actually a problem if an employer forces you to do so.
Yeah.
So you can always just check the box if you're comfortable with it, and that can be the end of it. If you find that you need some type of accommodation, then there are further discussions, and you would need to disclose exactly what type of support you need.
So let's jump into that then, because I want to walk through the 4 slides that we have on strategies, because when we look at the strategies, it sort of tells you what some of the challenges are. So let's start with distraction. There are a couple of questions in here that have come in around what are tips, what are strategies, accommodation, for example. And an accommodation is asking for a tool or a resource to help you do your job. You're not asking for something special or more than, you're asking for something to level the playing field.
Correct.
So we have some of them woven throughout here. So let's start with distraction. Would you say any of these fall under the umbrella of accommodation versus self-awareness, those of us who have a diagnosis, things that we can do to manage our distraction, or things for a manager to do for some of their staff, or some combination of these?
So the first one, noise canceling headphones, could be applied as an accommodation. And it's not something that's mutually exclusive to an individual with a disability. Some folks just like quiet. And if you're in a zone where it's a cube environment, folks just doing their day-to-day may be distracting and an annoyance to you.
That gets me thinking that we talked about this the other day, universal design.
Yes.
And actually, I had Jennifer, we met her at the conference as well. She was on the session last year talking about what universal design means. And essentially in this case, if we just make it okay to wear noise canceling headphones at work, you don't have to disclose.
Exactly.
That's even better if you create a space where that's okay. Now, that might not be true for the organization, but if you're a manager, you can make it okay.
You can make it okay.
Make it okay. Visual timers, task boards. Many of us have project management software.
Taking a break, just a simple getting up from your desk and walking around, going outside in nature if your work environment allows you to do that, or if you're working from home, just to change it up. That's good for you physically and mentally, whether or not you are an individual with ADHD.
So what's interesting about that is I'm trying to find the description of it, where I can't find the description. So I wanted to find it and say it correctly, but hyperfocus. We have those with ADHD, and I struggle with this. You have the challenge of distraction, but the opposite of that is a hyperfocus to the point of something called time blindness. And time blindness, actually, we did a podcast on that dropped this morning, right? But time blindness is something where getting up and moving can help you. So if you I get up and I will shake or do like this stretch routine in my office so I don't leave, but it stops me from getting caught in the proverbial rabbit hole.
Right.
This is a rabbit hole on steroids, perhaps.
And I find that, just like I said, it's good for just physical, but also mentally to just step away, because you break the cycle or come out of the zone, and it allows you to refocus when you come back.
Right.
And I think that's great for everybody.
Speaking of focus, Microsoft has something. I'm going to open this up. Can you all see my screen?
We can see the slide.
Can you see, but you can't see my screen?
I don't see your screen.
Oh, okay, well then too bad. I'm sorry. Because I was hoping you could see my screen so I can show you actually what I use. But there are timer tools that you can use. I have timers. You talked about a Fitbit. I use the clock on Microsoft. One of the settings is called focus timer. You can set it to give you a little ding and say, all right, take a 5-minute break. And then ding, all right, get back to work. Ding, 50 minutes is over. I'm not using it to manage my time. I'm using it to notice the passage of time.
Yep.
The difference. That's a difference. All right. The next one, the after distraction, is disorganization. And you have one of these, the to-do lists or the planners, or you want to talk about strategies here?
So what I have is a rolling list, and I've done the Franklin Covey and the this and the that. And I find that a simple list for me that I put inside of my notebook is really helpful. And I jot it down and I leave space to the left for me to reprioritize as new things come in. Because it may be a 2 today, but something happens and we need to make it a 3, or it jumps to number 1. And that just keeps me on task.
That's very specific, by the way. You are describing it visually.
Oh, yeah.
Very specific. So this isn't a list. This is Ipalla's process for managing tasks.
Yes. And I found it to be very helpful. It's something that I developed over time because that disorganization piece, before I recognized exactly what was going on. Yes, I see that eyebrow going up. Exactly. And I have now in the office, I try to.
Uh-oh. She froze up. So while she, you're back.
It's being very intentional about what I keep on my desk and working on one thing at a time and filing things away. So we have the ability, or I have the ability to go back and find things. There's nothing like knowing you have something and not being able to find it. That's a whole different level of frustration.
Whole different level. What's interesting about that, and we were talking about this the other day, is when it comes to note taking. So this is a little bit of distraction, and this is a little bit of the disorganization. I struggle with note taking. I've started using note takers, that join a meeting, capture the transcript, give you a recap, that kind of thing, because I suck at taking notes. And I have very strong visual cues. And so I will write down the cues in my notes, but not the content. But I can also find my notes just by paging through the documents. I know what I'm looking for because of the aesthetic of the notes page. It's very much how you were describing.
Yeah, you know what it looks like. You just need to get back to that page.
You mentioned the story. You said something about flipping through, looking for a page, and somebody's like, you're not reading it.
No, not at all. I'm looking for the visual, my recollection of how I took the notes on said subject.
That's exactly right. All right, before we move into the next two, let's jump to the polling question. Let's go to the next one because I see some questions in the Q&A. What's the most effective treatment for ADHD?
All right, poll number 3 is rocking and rolling.
So drugs, changing your behavior, psychotherapy, changing different ways in terms of lifestyle, or all of these. I am going to go to the Q&A and see what's in here while that's open.
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions and comments come in.
Yeah, we should just have an ADHD Q&A session. That'd be 2 hours right there. Somebody did make a clarification that the form that they're asking to disclose a disability is essentially that will create I lost it in the Q&A, but essentially it's not disability generically, but that could create challenges for you at work. That can impact the way you do your work. So, but the bottom line is disability is something that is an optional disclosure. Somebody said, isn't poll 2 misleading since people could be undiagnosed yet have ADHD? I hear what you're saying. We didn't intend for it to be misleading, more so a reinforcement of the fact that a childhood diagnosis doesn't stop in childhood. It moves into adulthood. And those who are diagnosed as an adult likely had this going back to their childhood. And actually part of the diagnosis is looking back at some of the way that these things have shown up for you in the past.
Jina, before you get going with that Q&A, I'll just let you know the majority with 85% have said all of the above.
It was a trick question. Because the real answer is it depends. There is no best way. So, but don't worry, you still get the credit for answering the question. You'll still get your CPE. But there is no solution that is the right solution for everyone. And for example, myself and my sons, we all opted to try medication. I used Adderall. One of my sons tried Ritalin, and another son tried a different medication. We ended up on 3 different medications. One son didn't like the way that medication made him feel, so he stopped and he moved into the behavioral therapy lifestyle change.
Okay.
As a strategy for management. I have Adderall. I'm looking at it right now. I stopped taking it because, as many people, if you've been on one of my sessions before, I've disclosed this. I have epilepsy, and I'm on epilepsy medication, and I just have this underlying anxiety that if I take ADHD medication and it impacts me neurologically in a certain way, even though my neurologist cleared it, I've opted to not do it. Okay. So treatment, it varies for all of us. There's no right answer. It's really back to what we're talking about here, which are strategies to help overcome some of the challenges.
And what I would just reinforce is none of this is one size fits all.
Absolutely.
It's incredibly individual based upon what your symptoms are, what your lifestyle is, what your comfort level is with dealing with the symptoms, disclosure, etc. So it is an incredibly personal journey for each and every one of us.
Yeah. Somebody asked the question, they're trying to figure out if it's worth it or not to go through the diagnosis. And to some degree, it might be validating for you. I found the diagnosis to be really not just clarifying, but it finally gave me words. There wasn't something wrong with me. And I found that to be helpful. But it also could be, look at the strategies that we're looking at here on the slides. If you find that you struggle with any of these symptoms, and if you do some research and you see more of the different symptoms, there's so many of them. A sense of insecurity, inaccurate self-observation, trouble going through established channels, constantly having many things happening, running many projects or activities at the same time, like constantly you find yourself doing that. If you find yourself experiencing many of these things, maybe if you focus on a strategy to help you with those things, then does the diagnosis matter? And again, getting the diagnosis is highly individualized. So thank you for the question. And the answer is going to be what feels right to you.
Exactly.
All right, time management strategies. Do you use reminders and alerts? Because you talked about reorganizing the actual layout of your list.
Mm-hmm. So on a daily basis, a few times a day, I look at my list. But when I take on a project, I will do a rough project plan to understand the times and dates, for key milestones. But I have never been a person who could effectively and consistently use one of the little project management software applications. It's just, my brain doesn't focus that way. So I will take my calendar once I've identified the milestones and put those on the calendar. It could be 6 months out. I need to have it on there, and I determine what's a good reminder to set. So it's not the night before. And that's how I manage it. And then I will share those with my team. We gain concurrence, and then we start working together. And if I'm really fortunate and I'm on a team that has a person who's fantastic with that software, they will raise their hand and take that on. I can follow it. It's just my brain isn't wired that way. And I finally accepted it.
There are 2 things about what you just said. I forgot the first one, but the second one is that if somebody else has the superpower of the project management, just using the software, one of the things to think about is if that's something that you find helpful, and you've described that as something that can be helpful, sitting down with that person in your team and giving them the permission to say, all right, Ipalla, don't forget, you're supposed to be doing this next week. And don't get defensive, but thank them. Okay, you are my auditory reminder because my paper systems and my visual systems, you're serving as that backup. And then if you're the manager of a team, offering different strategies to help project management and not being stuck to that, software that you use, Asana or whatever it is.
That's one of the reasons you have a team, because everybody brings something unique and has different skill sets. So you put together a team to bring it all together.
And that's how it goes, right?
Yeah.
Is there something else I wanted to make? Prioritize tasks by urgency. So one of the things that I do is I have flags, and I don't keep flags there permanently, but at the beginning of every week, I blocked off the first hour of Monday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. is weekly planning. And the first thing I do is I look at all the things I said I was going to do last week that I didn't do. They go on this week's list. And then sometimes I start flagging things. Red means you have to do this, Jina. And green means if you can't get to it, you can't get to it. That's my color system, because some people might see green as let's do this, whatever that is for you. So that might be helpful. All right.
And I do my planning. Oh, that's okay. I do my planning on Sunday nights. It's just something about sitting down Sunday and forecasting at least the first 1 or 2 days really helps. People talk about having anxiety on Sunday nights. If I sit down and I say, okay, what are the things that are happening Monday and Tuesday, and they're front of mind, I just am much more restful and prepping for the week.
That's nice. All right, restlessness. Last category that we decided to put up here. The one at the very bottom on relaxation techniques. I have to tell you that when I first started practicing meditation, it was hard to doing a 10-minute meditation using the app Calm, where they talk you through the process. The first few minutes is sort of helping you, just encouraging you to take breaths and to slow down and things to focus on. And then it goes quiet. And then somewhere around the 9th minute, the voice comes back in and brings you to the end of the 10-minute window. Let me tell you, that first minute, I was like, are we done yet? Are we done yet? My mind is all over the place. But what meditation has you do is constantly just practicing the quieting in the mind.
Yeah.
I have started to use that technique throughout the day, especially when I start to feel that anxiety, that I have forgotten something and I don't know where to go to find it. And so just practicing, slowing down your breath, slowing down your mind, trying to just quiet the chatter. It won't, well, for me, it doesn't stay quiet for long. But what it does is it allows me to come back to the work without all the stories of you're failing this, you've dropped that, et cetera, et cetera.
And, I am smiling because meditation was a challenge for me as well. About 1.5 years ago now, I started a mindful meditation practice. And it was hard to get started because I know I've said this to you, Jina, sometimes in the heat of things, my brain is like a racquetball court and I'm playing on all 4 walls. So to sit and try to, meditate, it was really, really hard. And what I did is I would close my eyes. I would cross my legs and get into a pose. And I lock my fingers together so that I'm not, my hands aren't going everywhere. And I just say, now breathe. And that starts, or even I would say gives me permission to just relax. And I noticed that my shoulders would drop. And then I'd start focusing on my breathing. And then I'd start listening to what they were trying to tell me, with the guided meditation.
Yeah, it's the kind of the same thing as like when somebody says, just shake it off. Just sort of, just shake it off, and then you can get back on track in an ADHD kind of way. I actually, when you said your fingers, sometimes I find myself just pressing down on my table. Just a tactile response. Fidget spinner is the thing that I put up there. All right, I'm not going to do it, but my husband does this thing where he can spin the pen. I tried it once and flung the pen across the table. There's this really cool thing my husband bought. I don't know if anybody knows about this or if they're still even available, but it's this sand and the sand has a stickiness to it. It doesn't stick to your fingers, but it allows you to mold the sand.
Oh, yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So he would play, that was sort of his tactile relief. Every now and again, I mean, he wasn't doing it during meetings, but he would find himself, maybe while he needed to think, just having something tactile quieted his mind so he could think. All right, so there are a lot of strategies that we've included here. There's so many questions. I want to get to the Q&A. We've actually talked about some of these. You started off sharing some of your strategies, your hacks. The one hack I do want to share the most, besides the focus timers, is brown noise. Spotify has a bunch of different types of noise lists. There's pink noise, blue noise, white noise, brown noise. Brown noise supposedly is a frequency that can help with settling the mind, but some people find other types of noise to be helpful. But you might find just having that sound in the background actually helps from an auditory perspective, doing what a fidget spinner might do.
Right.
So
I encourage people to try different things, because what works for one may or may not work for you, but it heightens your awareness of the possibilities, and then you find the fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So many questions. We'll see what we can get through. How about that? Oh, kinetic sand. Thank you, Katie. That's what you told us. To simplify the question, can ADHD get worse when you get older if there's no medication? I'll take that one. And my answer is it's not that it gets worse, but if you haven't developed strategies to help with any of these different symptoms or the way it shows up for you, you can increase those challenges. Medication alone won't necessarily solve it. You can take medication and find that it makes it worse. It just depends on what works for you. What's else? I don't know if you're looking at these questions. Do you find, either of you, but I'm going to pitch this one to you. Do you find that you need extra stimulation to help you focus? For example, they said if they're not working on a task that's not interesting, they need to have some music or the TV on to help them stay on task. So do you struggle with anything like that?
I find having music on, if it's a work task, is really a distraction for me, because I recognize the words and I start singing, and then, time blindness kicks in. Exactly. But what I find is if it's not something that I'm necessarily interested in, I will set a timer and I do focus time. And I'll say, okay, take 20 minutes, make progress, and then get up, take a walk, grab a drink, or do something else that is of interest. And that allows me to motivate myself and reward myself for spending the time on something that really.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. So I like the idea of finding something that works. You said it a moment ago. So if music works, great. If having the TV on keeps you on task, great. All right. Somebody says, can you give an example of time blindness? Well, I'll give you this example. Recently, my husband and I were thinking about buying a car. And so I was thinking, I wonder if it's cheaper to buy a car, or if he goes to the office twice a day. Maybe he just takes Lyft to the office 2 days a week. Multiply that out over the course of the year. Well, I thought that, I'm an accountant. So I'm like, let's do an amortization table, look at the interest rates and how long it would take to and amortize the cost of using the cash to buy a car. Like I started doing all of this. In my mind, it was going to take me about an hour. I had no sense of time passing. I was so deep in on that. I think it took me something like 6 hours. I lost most of that day. And so that's an example of just being so caught in a project, so hyper focused that in my mind, I couldn't sense the time.
Right.
All right, let's see what's next.
What else do we have?
Going down. That one was earlier. Sorry for the quiet, folks. I'm sitting here trying to get. I'm actually looking at a couple of different questions, and I'm going to put them together into one. From an HR perspective, when somebody comes in, if somebody has come in and asked for an accommodation,
Mhm.
is there something else that they need to be mindful of in order to get that support? Or is it simply just a question of ask and you shall receive? So if somebody's listening and they think, maybe I'll go and ask for an accommodation, what follows that? This might not be in your wheelhouse, but I thought I'd throw that out there.
No, so I actually owned the accommodation process for one of the organizations I worked with. And a person need not say, I am a person with X and I need an accommodation. The process is that, according to ADA, if the organization observes and thinks you might need one, it's okay to raise the question. It's not discriminatory. They're just inquiring how they can best assist you. If you come in and you say, I'm trying to figure out how to better do my job, and I think I may need an accommodation, that suffices.
Mm.
And the organization should then begin an inquiry or the interactive process with you to better understand what type of support you need. And they should have,
sorry, go ahead.
and they should have a documented process, ideally, that tells you what the steps are. Because that's a best practice.
The only thing I want to layer onto that is an accommodation need only be reasonable.
I was just going to say,
and so many accommodations are free, but
exactly.
People just know that if you go in and ask for an accommodation and you need this much support, you may only get that much support.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're not getting support, but it might not get you as much as you need. So just be aware. All right. Last question is, do you ever work too fast if it's a task that you are interested in? So it's one thing to hyperfocus, but it's another thing to go so fast through it that I'm going to gather from this, maybe you didn't pay it enough attention. You could have done more, that the excitement and the interest in it had you rushing through. That's the way I'm interpreting that question.
That's the way it hits me as well. And maybe some of the finer points you didn't pick up on because you were excited to kind of dive in. And I think everyone has had those moments where I take things that have been on my bucket list. If I get a chance to work on this, that will be, and it presents itself, and your project planning may or may not go out of the window, because you're excited.
Yeah. Autumn, can we do that last polling question while we're still addressing some of the Q&A?
Sure. Let me get that up and running.
Thank you.
There you go.
I do, and we don't have to share the results of this one, so we can just roll right up to the wrap up. The thing I wanted to say about that also is the creativity piece and the intuitiveness that somebody has. Some of the rush that people with ADHD might experience, and rush, I mean hurriedness, which includes interrupting, jumping to conclusions. That might be because they are thinking creatively, and that creativity starts to have them go down different paths. They are interested in something. They haven't evaluated all of the facts as clearly, or they've moved off and started doing some other things. So it can manifest itself in a number of different ways.
Okay.
All right. I'll give you the final word in a moment. Before we do that, I just want to show everybody the additional resources that are here. So there are some websites here you can go to learn more about it. I really do like understood.org, and Psych Central. They actually have quite a bit that can walk you through a lot of different aspects, Psych Central in particular. I found a couple of videos that you might find interesting. The one on the bottom left, I thought that was particularly helpful because it was, what does it look like for adults? And then the one on the top, how to ADHD, that's an entire channel. Lots of videos there. The next one was books. I have not read any of these books, but I did find this article that really explained what all of these books are and why they're helpful. The book that I read was called Driven to Distraction. And that book was a big part of why I chose to get diagnosed, because my children are diagnosed, but it still didn't make me think, maybe I should have it, like the way you experienced it. And then, like I said, you and I, we have this podcast, The Distracted Elephant. If you want to listen to it, great. If you do, email us. We'd like to know how we're doing, because it could be a hot mess, but we'd like to know. And so, Ipalla, as we wrap up, any final thoughts here? We got about a minute or so.
So this has been a great opportunity to spend some time talking about something that a lot of adults deal with, and there's still stigma. But again, I would just leave everyone on the call with ADHD, be it yourself or your children. Always know that it is not an albatross. It is what makes you unique. It is a superpower, and it is something not to be ashamed of.